We want God to be nice to us. We need to be nice to other people. That's the way it works. You reap what you sow.
Yeah.
Now it says, as you're in Ephesians 6, Romans 2:11 reads, "For there is no respect of persons with God." See, there's no respect of persons with God. God is basically like Boaz. Boaz was friendly to everybody, whether they were rich or whether they just were a reaper in the field. Okay? God's the same way. Whether or not you have a lot of money here today or you don't, what really matters to God is, did you wake up this morning and read your Bible?
Mm-hmm.
Did you wake up this morning and pray? Did you wake up this morning and just say, I'm going to live for God? Or are you trying to get the sin out of your lives? Because whether you have a lot of money or whether you don't, God doesn't really care about that. What he cares about is, are you obeying his rules? Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Right. That's what the Bible says. Are you keeping the commandments of God? That's what he cares about. And see, Boaz said, I don't really care if they're rich or whether they're poor. He was just friendly. Okay? Ephesians 6, verse 5, the Bible reads, "Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in singleness of your heart as unto Christ, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart." And so in verse number 6, the Bible says, not with eye service as men pleasers. What that basically means is, when the boss is around, you work hard. When the boss is not around, you don't work hard. Okay? Look, I've worked in an office before for years. There's certain people that when the boss is around, boy, they're at their desk, they're typing away, they're answering the phone and everything like that. It's kind of funny because I've always known you to be someone who goes outside and smokes all day when the boss is gone for the day. But now that the boss is actually here, there you are working hard. You look like you're doing a good job. See, the Bible says not with eye service as men pleasers. All of us need to remember that our boss is up in heaven. And so God sees everything we do. Okay, verse 7, "With goodwill doing service as to the Lord, not to men. Knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall he receive from the Lord, whether he be bond or free." Now this was mainly talking to the servants, but in verse number 9, it's talking to someone like Boaz, someone who's a master, someone who has money. "And ye masters, do the same things unto them, forbearing threatening, knowing that your master also is in heaven, neither is there respect of persons with him." See, we have to understand, our master's in heaven, and there is no respect of persons with the Lord. That's what the Bible teaches. And so, whether or not you're a multi-billionaire, or whether or not you have no money, God expects you to act the same way. And people that are rich, God expects them to humble themselves like Boaz. Right. And look, it's not required to have less money to be godly, but the reality is most people that have much money aren't that godly. Most people that have the sort of money Boaz has, they're not very nice people. They're not very good people. They're not very humble people. But Boaz, he was a humble person. Now, look at Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21. I want to show you one other thing to think about. And in Ephesians 5, verse 21, what the Bible reads is this: "Submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God." Okay? Now, in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21, it says, "Submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God." Now, I don't believe this is saying that husbands and wives both submit to one another. Okay? Because if you look at the last 11 verses, verses 22 through 32, it talks about wives submitting to their husbands. Okay? And then in verse 21, it says, "Submitting yourselves one to another." So I've heard a lot of people say, that basically you both submit to one another, and people kind of have different opinions about that. But here's what I want you to understand. That in Ephesians 5, verses 22 through 32, it tells wives to submit to their husbands. In verses 1 through 4 of chapter 6, children submit to their parents. Okay? Verses 5 through 9, servants submit to their masters. What I believe is being said is this: that if you're someone who's in a position that you need to submit, then you need to submit. If you have a boss, you need to submit to that authority. If you have a husband, you need to submit to that authority. If you're a child, you need to submit to your parents. That's what I believe the Bible is saying. Now, here's the thing. If you're a master, what did we just learn? If you want your servants to be good servants, to work hard, you're nice to them. A lot of husbands want their wives to do all these things. It's like, well, are you a jerk to them? Because, they're supposed to obey you, but they're probably not going to if you're a jerk. Just like if you have a boss who is a jerk, you're probably not going to work that hard for that boss. Don't expect your wife to really obey you much if you're a jerk. Don't expect your kids to really love you or care about you if you're a jerk to them, if you're rude to them. And so I believe what it's saying in Ephesians 5:21 is, if you're in a position where you have an authority, where you need to example is wives to husbands. Another example, which we saw in verses 5 to 9, is servants to masters. Okay? Now turn back to Ruth 2. Ruth 2. And so the first thing we saw was just simply this, that Boaz was just a humble and friendly person. Okay, that's what we see in Ruth 2, verse 4. But I want you to notice something else, that Boaz was also very organized. Ruth 2, verse 5, the Bible reads, "Then said Boaz unto his servant that was set over the reapers, whose damsel is this?" So Boaz has a servant that is set over the reapers. So in verse 4, Boaz gets there and he just says hello to all the reapers. Okay? Now when we read this, it sounds like it's easy to do. But look, all of us were rushed in the morning. We're tired in the morning, we're in a bad mood sometimes, and yet still Boaz just goes around and says hello to all the reapers. And then notice that there's a servant that is set over the reapers. Basically, he has somebody in charge that's running that for him. Okay? There's somebody that he trusts to run it. Boaz was organized. He realized that if I was just organizing this all by myself and doing all of it, I would not be that successful. Turn to Exodus 18. Exodus 18. Now, I'll be honest with you that before this church started, I was actually planning to pick all of the songs for the music ministry in every single service. Okay? And I actually heard a sermon preached by Pastor Joe Jones. And when I heard that sermon, I just changed my mind. Because he used to have a business, well, he was in a company where basically he had a lot of people underneath him. And he said one thing that he learned was if he gave the people that were underneath him kind of leeway to kind of make it their own, they did a much better job. Rather than him making all of the decisions. Now, obviously, he was ultimately the authority over that, but he gave them a little bit of leeway. And so when I heard that, I decided, you know what? Instead of me spending all this time picking the songs for the music ministry, I'm going to let the people that lead the music pick those songs. Because when I went to Verity Baptist Church, all the services that I was leading the music, I was picking the songs. And I said, you know what? If I want those people to kind of make it their own ministry and do a good job, the best way is to let them make it their own. Give them a chance to do it. Sometimes they're going to make mistakes, sometimes they won't. When I led the music, sometimes I made mistakes, and sometimes I should have done things differently, and that's always going to happen with whatever you do. If anybody's running anything, everybody makes mistakes sometimes. That's the reality. Everybody makes mistakes, and when that happens, it's not the end of the world. It happens sometimes. Life goes on. The Lord's not coming back today. We're all going to wake up tomorrow no matter what happens here. Whether or not everything goes perfectly or whether or not there's mistakes, it's not the end of the world. It's nothing to get upset about. It's fine. It's not the end of the world. And so I heard that sermon and I realized, you know what? I need to try not to do too much. Because if I'm trying to micromanage every single thing, it's just going to be over. It's not a good idea. And we see that in Exodus chapter 18. Exodus 18, verse 8. And Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done unto Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and all the travail that had come upon them by the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced for all the goodness which the Lord had done to Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. So Jethro's father-in-law is very excited. He's hearing about the great work being done, and he says, this is great. But then I want you to notice verse 13. And it came to pass on the morrow that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood by Moses from the morning unto the evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did to the people, he said, What is this thing that thou doest to the people? Why sittest thou thyself alone, and all the people stand by thee from morning unto evening? Now, what Jethro was telling Moses is that you're doing too much work. He's not saying what he's doing is bad. What he's just telling him is you're not doing it in a good way. Okay? Basically he's saying, you can't be the one who just decides every single thing. It's too much. Now this is a fine line because when it comes to final decisions, obviously I make the final decisions. But that doesn't mean that every single little thing I need to make that decision. Okay? See, there's certain things that happen. Let's say, for example, when we were at the old building, every once in a while they just started blasting rock music during the sermon. Right? Who remembers those days? And then sometimes Brother Jay or somebody else would just go down and just talk to them politely and nicely and get them to quiet down the music. Yeah, you don't have to ask me during the sermon if you can do that. It's like, praise the Lord. It helps. There's certain things like that obviously I don't need to decide all of that. Obviously obviously, you're going to know in your head, hey, you know what, he's going to agree with that. Now, obviously, sometimes maybe you make a decision and maybe I would disagree or whatever. That happens sometimes. What I'm saying is I can't do every single small thing. I've got to give certain people a chance, people that run the music ministry, and just kind of trust them with it. And they're doing a good job. And look, we're having a meeting here in a couple weeks just to make sure it's organized, but I don't need to just decide every single small little thing there. If they want to sing certain songs, they want to do this, that's fine. It's good to give people a chance to do something. Now, I'm not saying just chaos and no organization whatsoever, but I'm just saying that, what Moses was doing in Exodus 18 is what I was trying to do. Just a little bit too much. That's not what Boaz did, because what Boaz did is he had a servant set over the reapers. He had someone who he trusted and said, you know what? I can trust this guy. He knows what I want. He knows what kind of guy I am. He knows what I'm going to be happy with. I'm just going to let him do his thing. And you know what? He can trust this servant. We'll see that later on. But in verse 15, and Moses said unto his father-in-law, because the people come unto me to inquire of God. When they have a matter, they come unto me, and I judge between one and another, and I do make them know the statutes of God and his laws. And Moses' father-in-law said unto him, the thing that thou doest is not good. Now, why is it that it's not good? Verse 18, thou wilt surely wear away, both thou and this people that is with thee, for this thing is too heavy for thee. Thou art not able to perform it thyself alone. What he tells him is, it's just too much work for you. Right. It's too much stress. It's not even necessarily the amount of work. Because look, I could wake up tomorrow morning at 6 in the morning, and just if I had a job to do for 12 straight hours, that's not really that much. But the problem is when you're overseeing stuff, there's always stress. That whether you're working or not, you still feel that stress. Where you still feel like, man, if something goes wrong, it's my fault, and things like that. And so basically, Moses would have just worn away. He would have got exhausted. We can only do so much in life. And even Moses as the leader, he needed to find people he could trust to do certain tasks. Okay? Verse 21. Moreover, thou shalt provide out of all thy people able men such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, and rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens. And let them judge the people at all seasons, and it shall be that every great matter they shall bring unto thee, but every small matter they shall judge. So shall it be easier for thyself, and they shall bear the burden with thee. If thou shalt do this thing, and God command thee so, then thou shalt be able to endure, and all this people shall also go to their place in peace. And so Jethro gives him good advice. He says, find your best people, find people you can trust, and put them in charge. Now, I do want to highlight verse number 21. When it says able men, notice how it then says such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. Let's say, for example, somebody joins our church that is the greatest song leader in the world. Okay? They're just so talented. They're amazing. Okay? But they're not a very godly person. They're a saved person, but they just don't really love them. They don't go soul winning. They don't really read the Bible. It's just obvious to everyone that they're just not the godliest person. But they're just an amazing song leader. They will never lead a song in this church until they get right with God. You say, why? Because the Bible said people that are in charge are men of truth, hating covetousness. Okay? Yes, they have to be able men, but they need to fear God. They need to be men of truth. They need to be men of covetousness, not of covetousness, hating covetousness, the Bible says. They need to be men that actually love the Lord. See, it's more important to find people that are faithful than talented. Right? That's the truth. And quite honestly, that's one thing I learned. Pastor Mitt has told me before that's something he learned because your natural tendency is just pick the most talented person. Because you want it to be good and everything. But honestly, the most important thing is just finding someone who loves you. And quite honestly, the music ministry is a good example because it's a ministry we have. I think our music's pretty good. And I honestly don't care if some person who's the greatest song leader ever. I would much rather just have the men that we have that are doing a good job and love the Lord. Okay? And look, if somebody comes here and they're not at that point yet and they're growing, that can change one day when they reach that level. But it's more important to find people that actually love the Lord. That's what the Bible teaches. When you find people that you set over certain things, they have to be men that are able. Yeah, if somebody cannot lead music at all, and they have the worst voice, and they don't have the timing, no, they're not going to lead the music. But just because they have the ability, they also have to fear God. They also have to be men of truth. They also have to hate covetousness.
Right.
Now look, certain churches could be guilty of this because they could ordain someone as a pastor because he's the greatest speaker ever. Look, I'm not against every once in a while somebody has an opinion about something. I don't want you to get the wrong idea. If it's something that I think that's a good idea, we'll adopt it. This bulletin board was not my original idea, but I heard the idea, I liked it, and we decided to adopt it. If there's something that I think is a good idea, if you hear good advice, it would be foolish not to do it just because you say, well, I don't want to take advice from anyone. If I hear good advice, I'll take it. Okay? And Moses was someone who hears good advice from Jethro, and he realizes that's a much better idea. Rather than me just doing everything, let's just find faithful people that we can trust, and they can run those things. 1 Corinthians 12, verses 4 through 6. Now, there are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are differences of administrations, but the same Lord. And there are diversities of operations, but it is the same God which worketh all in all. And so at this church, we have various administrations, we have various operations. And depending on what gift you have, if you're able to do that, but you also love the Lord, then yes, we'll put you in charge of that thing. And that's something we're going to, here in the next couple months, we're going to start having really set things kind of in writing so people have a better idea and just put people in charge of various different things. They do have to be people with that gift or with that ability. Okay? But they have to be people that love the Lord. Okay? It's more important to find people that love the Lord than people that are really talented. Now turn back to Ruth 2. Ruth 2. So what makes Boaz such a great leader? Well, he's humble, he's nice, and he's organized. Okay? But he's also aware. Now, being aware is kind of a reflection of being organized. If you're organized, it's going to make you aware about stuff. But I want you to notice Ruth 2, verse 5. Then said Boaz unto his servant that was set over the reapers, whose damsel is this? He's referring to Ruth. So he gets there in the morning and he says, I don't recognize that person. Who is she? Now, if you remember in this chapter, there were a lot of women out there working. We showed that she goes out with the other damsels. It's not like there's a crowd of 100 guys. It's like, whoa, there's a lady out there working. But there's a lot of ladies out there working. Okay? But he shows up and he says, you know what? I see somebody new. I don't recognize this person. Whose damsel is this? And see, this is a reflection on him being organized, but you're seeing that he's aware of what's going on. Okay? He sees something is different. It's kind of like, at church, if there's somebody who's a new first-time visitor, I need to be aware of that. Now, this is something we all need to be aware of because we want to greet people and be friendly to them. But if somebody new shows up, I need to get an idea, okay, who is this person? What's their name? Say hello to them, be friendly to them, make them feel as welcome as possible. Okay? We work very hard to bring people to church. Isn't it hard to bring a first-time visitor to church? But if we work so hard to bring visitors and then they just all leave, what's the purpose? Honestly, you do yourself more good to do a good job of retaining who comes and visits, making them feel welcome, being friendly to them, than just bringing lots of visitors for one time and then they leave. We need to do a good job trying to retain those people. It's work to get people to come to church. It's also work to get people to retain people. Right. You say, why? Because my preaching's not that popular.
Right.
Look, they hear my sermons, and certain sermons people are going to hear and they're going to love it. Okay? Like so far, I don't think anyone would really be offended by what I've said. Most people would say, wow, that makes sense, that's good advice, but I'll tell you what, on our next point, a lot of people would get offended. And see, when people come in and they visit, there might be a lot they like, but there's that one thing they get mad at.
Yeah, right.
They're very likely to leave. But you know what causes people not to leave? If they feel welcome, and they think that people are friendly. They're going to say, well, maybe I didn't agree with that, but you know what? This church is really friendly. And then they might start coming first started listening to him, I thought he was way too harsh on the sidelines. That's my first reaction. Quite honestly, most of us in this room, you probably thought the same thing because you weren't used to that sort of preaching.
Yeah.
And see, I heard stuff that I didn't agree with. And I had been a soul-winning independent fundamental Baptist for like 5 years. I had been a soul-winning independent fundamental Baptist, but I still heard things and I'm like, whoa, this pastor's a little bit too extreme. I kept listening because I was still learning a lot. But what I want you to understand is, we will have people that visit this church and they hear me say certain things and they're going to be like, whoa, he's a terrorist or whatever. They'll think I'm way too extreme. But what's going to cause them to stick around is if we're friendly to them.
Yeah.
Okay? In terms of getting people to stick around, honestly, everyone in this room is probably going to do more of that work than me. The preaching's one part of that, but making them feel welcome is a huge part of why people go to church. Okay? Now, we're here in Ruth chapter 2, and I want you to notice verse number 6. And so he asks this servant, who is this damsel? Now notice what it says in verses 6 and 7. And the servant that was set over the reapers answered and said, it is the Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab. And she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheep. So she came and hath continued even from the morning until now, that she tarried a little in the house. As I said in another sermon, in verse 7, this is not her talking. This is the servant set over the reapers recapping what was said earlier. But what I want you to realize here is that Boaz just asked one question. Whose damsel is this? He doesn't ask a bunch of questions. He asks something very small, and the servant responds with a really long response. He says everything. He says, well, this is the servant he says it's the Moabitish damsel, which that came back out with Naomi out of the country of Moab. See, verse 6 is pretty much the answer to the question. But then in verse 7, he goes on and on and on. You say, why? Because Boaz knew this servant. And this servant knew what Boaz wanted. Because Boaz was organized, and Boaz had related the information he wanted. So all Boaz had to do was say, hey, whose damsel is this? And the servant set over the reapers realized part of his job was to make sure he recognized anybody knew, he knew who they were, and he knew the information about them. Because this servant's very aware as well. Why? Because Boaz was very aware, and he made sure the person he set in charge knew what he needed to do. So all he says is, whose damsel is this? And he comes back with a long response. Why? Because he knows that Boaz wants to know the information. He pays attention, and he gives the information to Boaz. So Boaz is very, that goes back to him being very organized. He relayed the exact information he wanted. If you have somebody in charge of something, you must make them aware with what you want. Okay? If I were to just tell my son, I want you to obey me, as he grows up and he's 5 years old, if I say, I want you to obey me, and let's say he doesn't clean his room, but I have not actually made it clear that I want him to clean his room. I just said, I want you to obey me, and then all of a sudden I spank him because he didn't clean his room. It's like, no, wait a minute, I didn't tell him to clean his room. I didn't make it clear what I wanted him to do. We need to be very specific with what we want.
Right.
If you're just very general and say, hey, I want you to get this project done, that doesn't really tell you much information. A better thing would be, hey, this project needs to be done by 2 p.m. on Tuesday. I need you to bring multiple reports of this, and this, multiple graphs, etc., etc. You have to be very specific.
Right.
Okay? And it's very obvious that Boaz is very specific. He's organized, and he clearly relays the information because the servant set over the reapers just comes back with all of the information. All he said was, whose damsel is this? That's only one question. He didn't ask all that other information, but the servant was aware of what he really wanted. Now turn to Numbers 13. Numbers 13. And so one thing I think all of us can be guilty of sometimes is we don't necessarily do a good job of training people. Because honestly, it takes time to train someone to do something.
Right.
And Boaz could have been lazy and just said, I know what I'm doing, and not taken the time to train the servant set over the reapers. But in the long run, he's going to save a lot of time. And it's going to run much more efficiently because he told the servant what he needed to know. Okay? It says in Numbers 13, verses 16 and 17, these are the names of the men which Moses sent to spy out the land. And Moses called Hoshea the son of Nun, Jehoshua. And Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, get you up this way southward and go up into the mountain. Okay? And so Moses sends 12 people to do this job. They're supposed to spy out the land. They're supposed to find out the information. And I want you to go down to verse number 31. But the men that went up with him said, we be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. And all the people that we saw in it are men of a great stature. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers. And so we were in their sight. And so, I'm not going to go through all the verses, but these men come back, and if you actually pay attention, they do give a detailed report. Now, they mix in a lot of lies in there, but they actually give a detailed report. Now, they try to spin it to fit their, agenda because they're afraid of going to the land. It's not that Moses did a bad job relaying the information, because they come back and they bring the report. It's just they're afraid.
Right.
Now, if Joshua and Caleb didn't go, they probably would have just come back and lied, because that would make more sense than saying, yeah, this land is everything like God said. It's got milk, it's got honey, it's a great land. But because of the fact Joshua and Caleb were there, they probably couldn't lie about it. They probably would have just lied about it. But, they come back with Joshua and Caleb, and they bring an evil report. They basically say, we're not going to be able to win this battle. I mean, it's a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. What does that mean? You just go there and the land you're just automatically killed? It's like, what? They're basically just trying to put everybody else in fear, because they're afraid to go fight the battle. Isn't it true when it comes to soul winning that people that don't go soul winning will say things like, well, soul winning doesn't work here. People will answer the door, they might yell at you. Man, every single place I've ever lived, soul winning's worked. And yet I've always found people in every one of those areas that says it just doesn't work here. Now look, I'm sure the Baptist missionaries report back that soul winning doesn't work in the Philippines. That's how they justify that they don't get anybody saved. People will always make excuses for why they don't want to do it.
Right.
But they do come back with a detailed report, and so Moses basically took the advice of Jethro, and he relays the information, and they bring back a detailed report. They just kind of add, well, we're actually really, really scared, so we're just not going to do it. Now turn back to Ruth 2. And so, as I said, what I've preached so far isn't really controversial. The last one really shouldn't be controversial, but honestly it can be. And I want to show you that Boaz is a very generous person. Okay, Ruth 2 verse 8, the Bible reads, Then said Boaz unto Ruth, Hearest thou not my daughter? Go not to glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens. And so once again we see that there were other women out there in the field. It says, Abide here fast by my maidens. So there's a lot of women out there. It wasn't just Ruth. And Boaz is being very friendly to Ruth. Okay? Notice what it says in verse 9. Let thine eyes be on the field that they did reap, and go thou after them. Have not I charged the young men that they shall not touch thee? And when thou art athirst, go into the vessels and drink of that which the young men have drawn. Now, I want you to notice in verse number 9 where he says, Have not I charged the young men? Okay? Boaz did not show up for work expecting more things to do. But he shows up and he sees this woman, Ruth, and he makes it a point to talk to his young men and give them a charge. This takes time to do. Okay? He actually takes them aside. We can tell because he gave the young men a charge, and he told them, don't touch this lady. Okay? Now, obviously, that's kind of given information that you're not supposed to touch this woman that you don't know. Obviously, that's inferring more than just touching. But he's basically just saying, hey, you better not do anything to her. Okay? So they realize even more so, hey, we need to be careful not to do anything. Any guy who would have the wrong intentions. But I want you to understand that he's giving them a charge. He's actually taking the time to give information to them. And he tells them to actually drop basically some of the vegetables or fruits that they would get. That way she can pick them up more easily. So he actually takes time. He shows up for work. He has his normal routine. There's somebody new there. He notices her. He finds out why she's there. And then he actually takes the young men and gives them a charge. It takes time to do that. The reality is that when you come to a job, sometimes things come up that you didn't expect. Right? More work ends up needing to be done. At a church, we come here sometimes, and obviously our goal is everything's going to be perfectly smooth. Nothing's ever perfectly smooth. Okay? And at your secular jobs, if you showed up to the office sometimes you get there and there's a problem. Okay? One example I like to give, which I guess is a good sermon illustration, is that I was working on a project with my boss when I was in Maryland, and he was giving a detailed report for this company in Kansas who wanted to do their actuarial reports. And so I took the time, and this project took a lot of time. It was pretty much 8 hours a day, pretty much almost my whole job, all day long, for like 4 weeks. I mean, it was a huge multi-million-dollar thing. So you're trying to get a deal so every single year we would have them. Basically, you invest time at the beginning, so in the long run you have this company. And we basically had a preliminary run with it, with just kind of the head person and a few others. And then the head person over there in Kansas, he's just like, man, I love it. He's like, this is great. This is just what I wanted. I just want one change. He said the problem is a few people in our company, a few people on the board are colorblind. And so those graphs aren't going to work for them. So could you change it to have a numbering system? Now that doesn't sound bad. Just change it from colors to adding numbers. Do you realize how much time it took to go into Microsoft Excel and PowerPoint and figure out how to make those changes? Because I'm used to just crunching the numbers. I make this big PowerPoint presentation. I watched every Google video imaginable. I was on YouTube watching all the videos, and man, nothing. It took so long. Now, I didn't show up expecting that. I just had to get the job done. That's just the way it is sometimes. And that's the way Boaz is here. He shows up and he just gets the job done. And he charges his young men. But I want you to notice what it says in verse number 10. Then she fell on her face and bowed herself to the ground and said unto him, Why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou shouldest take knowledge of me, seeing I am a stranger? And so basically she's saying, why did I get grace from you? Why are you being so friendly to me? Okay? Verse 11. And Boaz answered and said unto her, It hath fully been showed thee all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thine husband, and how thou hast left thy father and thy mother in the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knewest not heretofore. So basically, Boaz is aware of what she's done. She's forsaken Moab to serve God and to follow Naomi. He's heard about it and he's aware of it. Okay, that is the reason why he's being so friendly. Verse 12, The Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. And so, my point in reading all these verses is this. Boaz is very generous because she deserves it. Okay? He's generous because she deserves it. Yesterday, as I said kind of briefly in the morning sermon, there's somebody who wants to be a missionary in the Philippines that I've never met. Okay? He's going around from church to church, and he was asking us to help him out financially. And I'm just like, I don't even know who you are. And I know they're supposedly like in this movement or whatever, but he's asking me for money, and I'm just thinking, I don't even know who you are. It's like, I'm not going to give money to somebody I don't even know who they are. And then he was asking, can anybody help and everything like that. And I just told him, my advice to you would be move to a church in America and get trained up at that church. And I said, if you move to Verity, Pastor Minute is going to require you to be there for at least a few years, probably more than 3 years. And this is if everything goes according to plan. It's not like it's an automatic, you're here 3 years. It's not Bible college, okay? Hey, you're here 4 years, you get your ordination as long as you don't turn post-trib. That's not the way it works, okay? And I was just like, you're going to probably have to move there, and and then you can get ordained. Because, okay? See, Boaz was generous to Ruth because she deserved it. He had heard about what she did. Random people asking for money, it's like, we don't even know who you are.
Right.
And honestly, when it comes to running this church, one of the most difficult things is just dealing with the money. Because honestly, has really blessed this church. I didn't know we were going to be able to have AC units when we moved here to the Philippines. God's blessed us. It's great. We have a lot of stuff that fully aware that she's the real deal. He knows that, you know what, I can trust this person, okay? And so I'm not saying we would never give money because, there wasn't one time we did give money to someone outside this church, but when it comes to giving money, the number one thing is, are you a member of this church? Because we'll help out people that are members of our church, but if they're not members of our church and I don't know them, even if they listen to all the sermons we have online, it's just like, I don't know this person.
Yeah. Right.
And look, there are a lot of people that listen to sermons online. And a lot of those people ask for money too. It would surprise you. It's like, and here's the thing, it's like if you listen to my sermons online, you would have heard me preach like a whole sermon like against this Baptist mentality of just moving and expecting to get paid by the church. And you say, why is that? Because this situation will always come up with somebody asking me for money. It happens all the time. Somebody yesterday just asked me for money. I've never met this person in real life. And I woke up today, I talked to them a little bit, and then I had like a 10-minute audio message. On Facebook you can give somebody like a 1-minute audio thing. So I had like 15 different voice messages. Like, I'm not listening to these messages. It's like, the advice is just go to a church and get trained and ordained.
Yeah.
That's the secret. Okay? Depending on the situation, there is a universal law that I cannot break and you can't break, and it's called you reap what you sow.
Yeah, right. Amen.
See, in the Bible, David had this universal law called reaping what you've sown. And look, you could try to help him in that situation all you want. It wouldn't have helped the situation out because he was going to reap what he's sown no matter what he does.
Right.
Okay? Now, there are certain people that they make choices in life, and they are under the universal law of you reap what you sow. That's the reality. And honestly, sometimes there's no way to fix it. Now, here's the thing about this. If somebody's at our church, we'll try to help people out because the church is meant to help out the church. What we're not going to do is help out people we don't know outside the church. Or if we do, it's going to be a rare situation. Because, I don't know, take for example someone who's help out. Because I believe that's what the church is there for.
Yeah.
The church is there to help the church. The church is meant to help the members out if they're the real deal, and if they have a reason for why they're poor. They're just working hard. They follow rough times. Okay, but just this automatic idea that a church is meant to just give money to everybody, and it's just like, you know what? If we gave money to every drug addict, drunk, and derelict, that's fine. We have no money.
Yeah.
Because most people that ask for money are not the real deal. Now, some are, but honestly, most aren't. Now, turn to Ruth 4. Ruth 4, we'll wrap this up. Because they practiced it a lot.
Right.
I mean, it's always a good story. I mean, that they have all day to practice it. They're not actually working. So it's like, that's what they do. They spend a couple hours. It's kind of like a comedian will spend time practicing making jokes. They spend time basically with their routine of what to say to get money. Okay? He had a good story. And I can't remember if I gave him $10 or $20, but I got out of class and I saw that same person with this big bottle of alcohol in his hand. And I was so angry. Because, look, I didn't have a lot of money. I mean, I was paying my way in college. It's not like I had a lot of money, but I felt guilty. Okay? You can't if people are asking you for money, there's a good chance you're actually donating to a bad cause and not to a good cause.
Yeah,
Okay?
right.
Now, let's see the result of the life of Boaz here in Ruth chapter 4. And I want you to see in conclusion that people really respected Boaz. He really is one of the great examples of being a leader in the Bible. Ruth 4, verse 1. Then went Boaz up to the gate and sat him down there. And behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, Ho, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. Now, this was at a time and in a location where people knew who you were. You live in certain towns where everybody in that town knows who you are. Now, I understand that, here in the Philippines, there's like a lot of people. It's super crowded. Quite honestly, most people might not know unless they're in like your village or your little neighborhood. And we're the city and said, sit ye down here, and they sat down. So he basically just goes up to 10 people and says, hey, just sit down here. And they just listen to him. Now look, that's not really that common to be able to do that. But they respected Boaz. You say, why did they respect Boaz? Look, if you're someone who's kind, you're generous, you're humble, people are going to like you. Okay? And so Boaz was very respected in that town. And if he needed something from someone, he could just ask and people would help him out. He just says, hey, sit down, and guess what? They immediately just sit down. Now let me just oversight in something. And something does go wrong, then you are to blame. At least to some degree. And quite honestly, sometimes in situations, it's not one person to blame. Everybody has a part. That's just the way it is. Okay? Mistakes happen.